Hello, kids. I'm gonna tell you a story. Okay, a man appears. He lives in a blank world. Isn't that exciting? It has no color, no music, and and he's got nothing else to give his attention to except for himself. He looks himself over, and it turns out around every curve of his body and ruffle of his clothing, he learns something new about himself. And now, well, he's bored. Bored with himself. He desires something more. He wants content in his world. He wants something filling.
Come on! Oh.
So, the man who hopelessly desires content just so happens to stumble into a woman who... Oh, wow. And then something more beautiful than he could have ever imagined entered his world. A coastline that disappears out into the distance, and an ocean that reaches out so far, it falls over the horizon. And, a woman. Yeah, the man and the woman are intrigued with each other, and then soon bored. So they both look back out over the ocean, where their imaginations can roam free. Yee-haw! The end. Well, that wasn't a very interesting resolution now, was it? It came a little quick, and there was no horrible conflicts, you know? They just weren't Hollywood enough. Well, doggone Hollywood. And where was the climax? Come on. The climax, which should be the ultimate confrontation between the hero and the villain. But wait, this is ridiculous. I don't even have a villain. I am really sorry, kids. I'm gonna start with another story. A better story. Okay, there's this man. He lives in a big city, just like the one in which you live. His apartment is in a safe neighborhood, and he makes an honest living. Isn't that great? Well, one day, while he was doing everyday household chores, just like you and I would do, a robber, armed with a revolver, ran into his apartment and yells, "You know what this is. Run your pockets, yo." Well, that's plot point number one. You see, this had to have happened or else there would be no story. I mean, all interest lost, you know. Don't worry, I still got you. Okay, well, thankfully this robber was clumsy. He shot himself in the foot and fell to the ground yelling in pain. The man cautiously stepped towards the burglar. His foot was a bloody mess. The man sees the bloody wound. He also sees the phone on the wall, just 3 buttons away from a police call. The man thinks, then pauses, and then begins to pull out his handkerchief. The climax. He kneels down beside the burglar, removes his shoe, and begins to wrap his wounded ankle, trying to stop the dangerous amount of blood flow. The burglar becomes calm and curious. He looks up at the man with humility in his eyes. I'm sorry, kids. This isn't very realistic. Nobody really does stuff like that nowadays, don't you know? I'm sorry if I've lost your attention. I got another one. This one's a doozy. Okay. Once upon a time, a man who lived a simple and lonely life fell asleep on a park and a bench. Don't worry, I'll get this right. Well, one day, a woman walked up and sat down on the same bench to read her book. She didn't notice him, but he definitely noticed her. Her beauty captured his love that very instant. The man sat up and leaned towards the lady to get a better look. She was even more beautiful up close than 3 feet away. He decided to scoot towards her, hoping that she would notice him. He scoots. No response. He scoots again. She still didn't notice him. So, getting utterly impatient, he yelled, "Hello!" The harsh introduction frightened her. Angrily, she turned herself the other way, hoping that the man would cease to exist. If she couldn't see him, he didn't exist. The man began to think of different ways he could win her affection. The only thing he could remember is the advice his grandfather gave him. Women love a good storyteller. The man turned and asked the woman if he may tell her a story. The woman scoffed in reluctance, but with the second thought, she looked carefully into his eyes, and then with a tilt of her head, welcomed the story. The man began to tell the most beautiful story ever told. It was perfect in every way. It went exactly how he wanted it to go. Just at the right time, he revealed the initial conflict. The rising action that he presented would capture any mind. And then the climax. It was perfectly placed. Perfect in order to usher in the highest of interest. His resolution put peace in the heart so deep, the God of peace had to place it there himself. No greater story has ever been told. And as the man ended his story, the woman, who was completely and utterly absorbed in his words, snapped out of a dreamy state and realized that she no longer heard the man's voice. Not sound, not safe. The man smiled at her in suspense. He waited for her to respond to the story. The woman, with no warning at all, became insane with rage. She stood up and pulled out a revolver. She shot the man directly in the head and ran away, never to be seen again. And so, the world was without problem. The end. Oh, ooh, I'm terribly sorry. That was an unfortunate way to end. Please forgive me. I must make it up to you now somehow. Please, let's finish the story of the man who showed the robber love. Okay? Okay then? Alright. So the robber laid helplessly on the ground. It being in an emergency because of the extreme amount of blood, the man cared for the robber and bandaged his wound. The robber began to understand how humbling the situation was. The man was full of deep thoughts and questions. He stood there, engrossed in his thoughts. Chaos was the floor of his mind. And then there was light. He walked out his front door. He began to walk and walk and walk. He was on his way out of the city. He didn't know why, just like he didn't know why he had to help the robber. It doesn't make any sense. The sounds of the city began to fade behind him. The few cars that were there, fewer and fewer, passed by him. There was no one nearby. Soon, there was nothing nearby. In fact, there was nothingness. Just the man triumphantly marching away from the busy city. The man walked comfortably and poetically up to the most beautiful coastline anyone had ever seen. The woman, who was faithful and true, waited for his arrival. They embraced each other and then began to observe the most beautiful sunrise anyone had ever seen. And the man and the woman lived happily ever after. Remember, love conquers all. The end.